Hello, I'm Ted Morrissey, and this is a welcome video to my course for Lindenwood University in their MFA in Writing program. And this is a revisionist fiction Shakespeare edition, specifically March 2023. Just want to do a quick video to kind of introduce you to the course. I'm sure you already have something of an idea what it's about, but here's a few more particulars perhaps. We're going to be reading 3 plays by Shakespeare, and then we're going to be reading 3 novels based on those plays, inspired by those plays by very contemporary authors. And specifically, we're looking at works that have been produced by the Hogarth Shakespeare Press, where they commissioned contemporary authors to write novels based on the original plays. But there are lots of revisionist works out there of Shakespeare. That is a gross understatement. So we'll talk about some of those also kind of along the way. But just in terms of specifics, we're going to start off looking at Shakespeare's Othello. And that is one of the earlier plays, probably first written, performed around 1603, 1604, something like that. And after we read Othello, we're going to be looking at Tracy Chevalier's modern retelling of Othello, which she calls New Boy. And so that's a really interesting take on Shakespeare's original. Then we'll be moving on to Shakespeare's The Winter's Tale, which was one of the last plays Shakespeare wrote, around 1611 probably, something like that. And after we read The Winter's Tale, we're going to be looking at Jeanette Winterson's The Gap of Time. Winterson's one of my favorite authors, and so I was really excited to discover that she got the nod to write the revisionist version of The Winter's Tale, which is one of my favorite Shakespeare plays. So The Gap of Time is going to be on the docket. And then finally, we're going to finish, as perhaps Shakespeare himself did, with The Tempest. And what I mean by that is a lot of scholars, readers of Shakespeare over the centuries have thought that The Tempest maybe was his final work that he wrote for the stage, and that we can find references to that effect in the play. We'll obviously talk about that as we get into it. But anyway, we'll end with The Tempest, which again from 1611 or so, probably about the same time as The Winter's Tale. And then we will finish the course with Hagseed, which is Margaret Atwood's modern retelling of The Tempest. And of course, Margaret Atwood is one of the hottest writers on the planet. And so it's really exciting to read her interpretation of Shakespeare's The Tempest, right? So we're going to have kind of a dual purpose throughout. Our overarching purpose as writers is to look at these plays for our own creativity and our own narrative interests. In other words, how might we approach these plays in terms of extracting ideas for our own revisionist kinds of work? Now, we're looking at books which are kind of like whole play interpretations, kind of recasting the plays in a different time period, in a different context, and so forth. And that's one way that revisionist writing can happen. But sometimes writers will take other approaches. They will, write prequels. They'll write sequels. They'll write the story from a different character's perspective, and then maybe what the primary perspective was in the original. So there's all kinds of variation. So we'll talk about that as we go. So again, our main interest in the plays is to look at them for our own kind of creative fodder, if you will. But we will be studying Shakespeare along the way and talking about the plays and learning a little bit about those as we go. I'm not a Shakespeare specialist. I'm certainly a Shakespeare enthusiast, and I've been teaching Shakespeare for 30 years or so, and I've been teaching this particular course for I think over 5 years off and on. So I know a little bit about Shakespeare, and I'm always anxious to learn more, to read more, etc. So those are our 2 kind of main objectives, and essentially what we'll do is we'll have weekly discussions via the discussion board, of course, about either the play itself, or then after we read the revision, we'll talk about how that particular author revised the play, what elements they kept, what maybe they deleted or changed significantly or whatever it might be. And then at the end of the session, your main project, your main writing project will be to do a revisionist treatment of your own, to look at one of these plays and use it for your own inspiration, write your own original narrative based on that play, and then also talk about in your final project, kind of what you drew from, what you were trying to do with the play, and things like that. All right. In terms of how the course is going to operate from kind of a nuts and bolts standpoint, I ask that you try to complete your discussion post each week by the end of the evening on Friday, which may be a little bit different time frame than you find in other courses. But that way, if we can all kind of contribute to the discussion board by Friday, then that gives us the weekend to look at each other's contributions to the discussion and to respond to at least two of our classmates' posts in hopefully a kind of substantial, meaningful kind of way. And then on Monday, almost always, I will read your discussion posts and I will, grade them and respond to them and post my own comments on the discussion board and that kind of thing. And then also each week I'll be posting notes on whatever it is we've been reading, and I'll put those on the announcements section. I may use announcements somewhat differently than other instructors in the program. I do use them as just plain old announcements. So when I have some information I need to share with you, I'll make an announcement. But I also use them to convey, information about the texts and to try to get you to think more deeply about them and so forth. So I'll post each week notes on the Tempest or notes on New Boy or whatever it might be, and ask that you read those and that you respond to them in some kind of a way. I think they're useful information, important information, and by asking you to respond to them, even if only briefly, then I'll at least be relatively assured that you looked at them and thought about them and was able to formulate some kind of a response. Now, these are not graded, these announcements, these notes, things that I put up on the announcements board. Not graded per se. They're not graded like your weekly discussions, which actually gets a grade and comments, one way or another. But at the end of the session, as I say, I will want you to kind of talk about what you drew from as inspiration for your own revisionist work. And obviously that, is from the readings, but also hopefully from the discussions, from the notes, and also from the videos that I'll be posting on a weekly basis as well. So I'll be putting those up usually on Tuesday, probably get around to that on Tuesday. And I'll also ask you again to respond, if only briefly, to the video. In both the notes and the video, again, I'm going to try to extend kind of thoughts and points that were made during the discussions from the previous week. Just try to take those a little further, maybe get you to think about them a little bit more, and so on. All right, so that's kind of how it's going to work. Obviously, if you have questions or what have you during the course of the session, then put a notice in or send me a message, I should say, via Canvas or email me, and I'll respond to it as quickly as I can, usually within a few hours, quite frankly, because I try to keep a close eye on that sort of thing. If the answer to your question is one that I think everyone can benefit from, I'll turn it into an announcement, not obviously citing you as the source of this information or the reason for posting. But usually I find over the years that if a student has a question, it's a darn good one, and it's probably one other students have or could have, and so everyone can kind of benefit from my responding to it. All right, so I'm super excited about teaching this class. It's one of my favorites to teach here at Lindenwood. Quite honestly, the last time it was on the schedule, it didn't draw the requisite number of students, so it was canceled. So it's been a little while since I've taught it, so it's very, exciting to get back to it. This is a really interesting time to be teaching it, meaning the spring, because every summer, I like to go to the Illinois Shakespeare Festival, which is not far from where I live in central Illinois, and they always do a great job putting on Shakespeare plays. And this summer, one of the plays they're doing is The Tempest, which I've seen a couple of productions of, but I'm always excited to see a new version. So that's kind of fun that we'll be reading and talking about The Tempest, and then just a few weeks later, I'll be able to go and see a really well done performance of it. So that's cool. But I also really like this class because it brings together a lot of my interests as a writer in particular. And what I mean by that is I'm very interested in revisionist work. Maybe some of you have taken the other course I teach here at Lindenwood in revisionist fiction. I've written a few novels that are revisionist, a couple of short stories, but as a reader, I'm very interested in revisionist work. I know some of you are not totally familiar with that term, so one of the things we're going to be looking at is, what does that term even mean? Some people use the terms fan fiction and revisionist fiction synonymous. I don't think they're quite the same. That's one of the things we'll be discussing. But on the other hand, there's no hard and fast rules about that. There's definitely some gray area there. But anyway, we'll be looking at that. So I really enjoy revisionist work. So the fact that this course focuses on 3 of Shakespeare's plays and then revisions of them is obviously much to my taste, which is why I suggested the course. And then also just Shakespeare himself. I'm just a very big fan. Obviously, I like the plays, but just he as a writer is someone that I very much admire. He was an experimental writer, which I'm also interested in experimental fiction. In fact, just finished teaching my course in experimental fiction a couple of weeks ago. And so one of the reasons that Shakespeare was so popular in his day and stood out from his peers, he was the most popular playwright of his day for most of his career. And a big reason for that is that he was trying new things on the stage, things that other contemporaries of Shakespeare's were not doing, or at least not doing very well. And so he was an experimentalist in terms of mixing genres and trying all kinds of things. And again, we'll talk about that as we go. But interestingly, Shakespeare was a revisionist writer himself. Nearly all of his 36 or 37 plays, the number of plays varies a little bit depending on which scholar you talk to, because there's some disagreement on which plays should be part of the canon and which shouldn't, and so forth. But of the 3 dozen or so plays that Shakespeare wrote and produced for the stage, nearly all of them were revisions. He either was revising other writers' tales. One of the reasons that so many of Shakespeare's plays are set in other countries, Italy, for example, was a very popular setting for a lot of his plays, but other places as well. But one of the reasons for that is that Shakespeare was taking stories from writers that originally set them there, in Italy or in Denmark or in Scotland or wherever it might be. So he was borrowing liberally from other writers to retell their tales. He also rewrote history, revised history. So his history plays are obviously not straight, historically accurate representations of Henry V or Henry VIII or King John or whoever it might be, but are Shakespeare's interpretation of those histories. So he was a revising writer in his own right. And I think it's the kind of the height of irony or something that here we are looking at ways to revise Shakespeare when 400 years ago Shakespeare himself was looking at ways to revise other writers' work, other historians' work, and so on. So there's just a lot of my own personal interest that I can kind of bring to bear on this course, which is why I enjoyed teaching it so much. So I'm going to stop there. I didn't want to make this too long, but I wanted to give you a little bit of a sense of what the course is going to be like. Obviously, if you have any questions, reach out and I'll be happy to respond as soon as I can. But otherwise, I look forward to working with you on Shakespeare revisions for the next few weeks. All right, see you down the digital road.